So this is the first of our public policy-focused sessions on advancing AI safety, standards and international cooperation. So it will look at both those areas for the importance of managing AI governance, which is obviously inherently international. This session runs until 2:20, and then there'll be a short break before the next session. So it's my pleasure to introduce Florian Ostmann, who's going to chair this session. He is the head of AI governance and regulatory innovation within the Turing's public policy programme. More excitingly for me, until recently, he was on the Royal Statistical Society's Data Science Section Committee, although now he's too busy at the Turing to carry on with that. In the past, he's got a master's in public policy from the Harvard Kennedy School and a doctorate in political philosophy and an MA in legal and political theory from University College London. He's contributed to the IEEE Global Initiative on the Ethics of Autonomous and Intelligent Systems and much, much more. So please welcome Florian to the stage, and he will introduce the rest of his panel. Florian Ostmann.
Thank you very much, Timandra, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us, both in the room and online. I know we have strong competition from the other stages, so appreciate you deciding to join us. The topic of AI safety and more broadly AI governance is, of course, as timely as ever. And so I'd like to start the session, before I move on to introducing our distinguished speakers, with a bit of scene setting and providing a bit of context on this topic for this session. So those of you who attended last year's AI UK conference may remember that we did have a session that touched on standards and international collaboration during that conference. And I think it's interesting to sort of think about, reflect back what has happened over the last 12 months since then. I think one interesting development is that a year ago, we started towards the end of the session thinking about generative AI and foundation models, and to what extent there was a need to perhaps rethink some aspects of AI governance in the context of generative AI entering the scene. Now, a year later, of course, we see generative AI being at the center of almost every debate on AI governance. So there's been a real shift in sort of the kinds of systems that we think about when we think about AI governance. Interestingly, associated with that has been a semantic shift. A year ago, most discussions were framed around trustworthy AI. Today, we find ourselves having a lot of discussions around AI safety as a concept. And one question to explore in this session is sort of what's behind that shift, and to what extent the meanings of the kinds of issues that we're looking at may have changed. But there are also, I think, three important developments in addition to this general focus on generative AI that I want to briefly highlight at the outset to sort of frame our discussion. The first one is that there have been really significant policy developments here in the UK over the last 12 months. And many of you, I'm sure, are well familiar with sort of the key moments, and we'll hear more about those from Daisy later on. Most prominently, of course, the AI Safety Summit that took place last November, hosted by the UK government. Associated with that, the establishment of the AI Safety Institute in the UK, and then more recently, the government publishing its response to the AI regulation white paper that was published last year. Now, in addition to those developments in the UK, there have been really important developments in other jurisdictions and around the world, and a move towards greater international collaboration. So international collaboration, I think, has become a more prominent theme. In terms of other jurisdictions, in the US, we've seen the announcement to set up an AI Safety Institute similar to the one in the UK. There'll be follow-on AI safety summits. We might even think of the AI Safety Summit movement, perhaps. We'll see whether that's, whether we've gotten to that point of referring to that in that way. But there'll be an AI Safety Summit in Korea quite soon, and then another one hosted by France later in the year. The OECD has started to do additional work, including on AI safety at the international level. And then in Europe, of course, in the EU, we've recently seen the passing of the AI Act, And in the latest stages of the discussions and negotiations of the AI Act, the question of, to what extent is there a need to make adjustments to account for foundation models was one of the prominent points of discussion, key point in the final negotiation. So those are 2 points, developments in the UK, international developments, and then as a third point, I think a clear sense, increased recognition of the role of standards and the importance of standards in the space. There are a number of contexts in which we see this. So the AI Safety Summit emphasized standards as one of the issues that were considered during the summit. The AI Safety Institutes in the UK and the US, as part of their mission, have a role to think about standards for AI safety. And in the EU AI Act context, now that the AI Act has passed, there's a significant shift in attention, really for anyone concerned with the AI Act, to look at the standards that are being developed. That work already started last year, but it's getting more attention now, the standards that will support the implementation of the EU AI Act. Also, just to briefly mention on the topic of standards, that's a development we also see reflected in our own work here at the Turing and together with our partners. Some of you will be aware that we have an initiative called the AI Standards Hub that we launched 1.5 years ago, partnership between the Turing, the British Standards Institution, and the National Physical Laboratory, working very closely with the UK government and funded by DCIT. And that initiative is very much focused on awareness raising, advancing international collaboration, research, capacity building around AI standards. And not only has our community really rapidly grown in the UK over the last year, which sort of shows the interest in the UK and in this topic and the significance of standards, but also internationally. We've had a lot of interest in the Hub's work from around the world and have launched a new program of activities that's very much focused on thinking what we can do to collaborate and try to solve the challenges that we've set out to solve at an international level with partners rather than doing so with the UK focus. If you're interested in the AI Standards Hub, I'll say a bit more about that later. We also have a demo stand where you'll be able to find more about our work. But with all of that said, I'll move on to introduce our speakers, and I'm delighted to be joined by 3 experts that will be able to share their perspectives on different aspects of the developments that I just mentioned. So the first speaker joining us in person is Daisy McGregor. Daisy is the Deputy Director for International AI Policy in DCIT, the government's Department for Science, Innovation and Technology here in the UK. And Daisy was closely involved in the delivery of the AI Safety Summit in November and is now very closely involved in discussions and the preparations for the Safety Summit hosted in South Korea later this year and then further down the line in France. So it'll be interesting to hear from Daisy, among other things, how those developments look like. Prior to joining DCIT, Daisy was Private Secretary to the Prime Minister number 10 and previously spent a decade working in monetary policy and financial stability at the Bank of England. Thank you for joining us, Daisy. Second, we'll have Elham Tabassi joining us remotely. Elham joins us from the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US, in short NIST, where she has served in various leadership roles on AI, including as a Chief AI Advisor, Associate Director for Emerging Technologies and Information Technology Laboratory, and also the US government's AI Standards Coordinator. Now, more recently, Elham was appointed as the Chief Technology Officer for the newly established US AI Safety Institute and will be responsible for leading the technical programs of that institute. So it'll be interesting to hear from you, Elham, both sort of the reflections on your longer standing work on AI standards, including the NIST AI risk management framework, but also more recently the work that you're now involved in with the AI Safety Institute. Thank you for joining us. And then last but not least, we have Sebastian Hallensleben, who heads the digitization and artificial intelligence work at VDE, Association for Electrical, Electronic and Information Technologies, based in Germany, where he is responsible for new product and service development, as well as giving advice to government institutions, both in Germany and at the European level. And now Sebastian wears several hats and sort of important AI governance fora internationally that will be relevant to discussion today. One important hat is his role as the chair of the CEN-CENELEC committee for AI. So CEN-CENELEC is the European standards organization that's developing the standards for the implementation of the EU AI Act. And Sebastian chairs that committee. We'll be able to tell us more about that. He's also involved in the OECD's work on AI, where he chairs the expert group on AI risk and accountability, and also occupies various other roles, including the Council of Europe and UNESCO. Thank you for joining, Sebastian. And thanks for the warm welcome from the audience. Great. So I'd like to start with the first round of discussion and invite each of you to sort of share your reflections on some of the themes and developments that I mentioned earlier. And I'd like to see if we can combine sort of two broad questions. One is around the meaning of AI safety. So as I mentioned earlier, we've seen this shift in many discussions from trustworthy AI to AI safety. AI safety as a term, I think, varies in meaning depending on who is involved in the discussion. We've seen leading up to the AI Safety Summit sort of discussions about a relatively narrow focus on frontier AI risks. Other people might think of AI safety as a broader category, think about safety in relation to all kinds of AI systems. Some people think of safety in terms of existential risks. So a question of, for each of your work areas, how do you conceive of AI safety in terms of the scope of issues, the kinds of technologies, the kinds of risks that you're thinking about? And then as a second aspect, looking back over the last 12 months, what would you describe as the most important developments in the AI governance space internationally, and what have those efforts achieved to date? So let's start with you, Daisy.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm very honoured to be on the stage with you, Florian, and as well as Elham and Sebastian too. So answering your questions. The first on AI safety definition. So I should acknowledge up front there is no universally agreed definition of AI safety or indeed of frontier AI either. For the purposes of the summit, though, we did have to develop a working definition, and we've actually published it on the internet so that we could scope the summit. But just to be really clear, I don't think these are fixed definitions, and there's still lots of discussion globally about them. So the definition that we actually put out is quite broad. So the prevention and mitigation of harms from AI. And we were clear that these could be deliberate or accidental, caused to individuals, groups, organizations, nations, or globally, and include physical, psychological, or economic harms. Maybe perhaps kind of useful for the purposes of today to note that practically, in terms of what we're working on, especially in the AI Safety Institute at the moment, is misuse risks, autonomous systems, and societal harms, if that helps to put some bounds around it. So I think your second question was, it is entirely possible that I have quite a different definition to, as you say, Elham and Sebastian, so I'd be interested in others' views on that. So in terms of the most important developments internationally over the last 6 months, or the last year, I know you want me to talk about the AI Safety Summit and the AI Safety Institute, and I will, but I don't want to suggest that I think they are the most important developments. I think they are important, and I think there were many others as well. And I just want to point out 3 of those before I kind of move on to brief overview of the Summit and Safety Institute. So just to pick up three developments internationally. So last year, everyone in this room would know that there were a huge number of multilateral fora looking at AI. And I think when I speak to people about this, people often express some exasperation with the number of different groups and some overlap. But I actually saw this as a really good thing, because essentially it meant that a similar group of people were regularly meeting each other in the world and talking about all issues to do with kind of risks and opportunities of different types of AI. And what that has meant is I think there is a common understanding building on a global basis, and there's a lot of connective tissue between countries as well. And I think those are the things that are the kind of foundation for really meaningful international collaboration and work going forward. The second thing I want to point out is the US Executive Order, the EU AI Act, and, if I may, the UK's White Paper and consultation response. I think that these created some blueprints for how countries could think about regulation, and it is early days, but I speak in my job sort of regularly to AI leads in many countries, and I do get the sense that most countries are looking at these as kind of different options for where they could broadly kind of locate their regulation on AI. And so I am kind of optimistic as a result that there'll be some level of harmonization. I should be really clear here, there are very big notable exceptions to those three. I don't want to sort of suggest they are the only options out there. China in particular was kind of very on the forefront and kind of ahead of other jurisdictions in terms of coming up with really comprehensive regulation as well. And then the third thing, I think I would just note the work of the UN AI Advisory Board. So they have worked incredibly hard and incredibly quickly to think about international governance going forward. And I think their work has created a momentum globally behind this conversation that has surprised me in terms of how much momentum there is. I thought it might take us a bit longer to get to the conversation about exactly where do we think this needs to settle in the long run. But I am optimistic that actually by the end of this year we will have sort of broadly come to some consensus view globally about kind of which fora will kind of be the core ones and what each will do, and sort of ensure that that is coherent. So they're not the only things that happen internationally that are really important, but I just wanted to kind of flag them because I think they are sort of kind of big in my mind in terms of getting us to where we are. AI Safety Summits and the AI Safety Institute. I should say, Florian, this is my longest answer by far, I absolutely promise. So I will be quiet in a moment. On AI Safety Summit, so I'm sure most people in the room are familiar with what happened at Bletchley, but for those who aren't, I'll just recap very briefly. So the UK organised the first AI Safety Summit at Bletchley Park in November 2023. It picked up on many issues. The kind of core issue in the agreements that we landed were about the safety of frontier AI. And that's because we saw this as the most urgent issue to solve that didn't currently have a kind of fora globally to come to agreements. And I should say as well, one of the key features of the summit was that it not only involved countries from all across the world coming together, and particularly those who host frontier AI systems or host companies with frontier AI systems, but frontier AI companies themselves were at the summit at the kind of highest level and a core part of the agreements. Just to say, in terms of safety, the reason we care about safety and focused on this is because ultimately that underpins opportunity. So if you don't have systems that are safe and you can use, it makes it much harder to innovate, both for smaller companies and in developing countries as well. And to realize the opportunities from AI, we need to make sure that they are safe to use. So I just want to reiterate that in terms of why we're so focused on safety. There were a number of agreements landed there. Just to pick out a couple, we agreed with frontier AI companies that they would submit models for future versions of models for testing by governments before they're deployed publicly. All of the countries there also agreed to collaborate on an international AI safety report. So there'll be 2 of those this year, an interim report before the Korean summit and a final report before the end of the year. And we also agreed to hold 2 further summits at this stage. So as Florian said, the first one in Republic of Korea, and then a second towards the end of the year in France. I will stop there on AI safety summits. I am super happy to take questions at any point. On the AI Safety Institute, just briefly to touch on it, I should first of all say I don't work in the AI Safety Institute. I work extremely closely with colleagues, but I'm sort of representing them. Also, I know Elham will talk about work of the US AI Safety Institute, so I won't spend too much time on it. But it's a body launched last year by the UK government. It currently sits within the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. Since the middle of last year, it's been recruiting machine learning and AI technical experts, as well as a very high-profile expert advisory board. It does broadly three things at the moment. So first is developing technical evaluations to test models. And that is part of implementing the agreements made at Bletchley around pre-deployment testing. Second, it's developing testing protocols. And third, it's starting to work with partner institutions globally. I should just say we really want the UK Safety Institute to be a kind of global public good, both itself and through its partnerships with other countries. And so when we talk about future international governance, maybe that's something we come on to. I will pause there.
Great, thank you very much, Daisy. And you ended on the Safety Institute, which I think is a brilliant segue to pass over to Elham. So yeah, Elham, similar question to you, invitation to share your reflections both on the meaning of AI safety in the context of recent developments, and then what do you see as the most important developments, and of course be really interesting to hear about your work on the AI Safety Institute, including how it relates to or contrasts with the AI Safety Institutes being set up elsewhere, including in the UK.
Thank you, Florian. Thanks. There's an echo, right?
I think we can hear you all right.
Okay, I hear echo. Very good. I want to start by thanking the organizers for having me participating in this event. Let me fix the echo.
Over here, the sound is fine. We can hear you.
Right, but normally. I cannot. I hear multiple of myself, and it makes it difficult to talk, but I do my best. In terms of the definition of the safety and what you said, Florian, about the move from trustworthy responsible or the attention going from trustworthy responsible into safety, I first want to completely agree with what Daisy said, that I think the common thread, what we all share, is harnessing the power of AI for good while minimizing its negative impacts and harmful consequences. And I think with that in mind, then it becomes a little bit of the terminology to kind of unpack. And unpacking terminology is really important because it can also advise and inform what we are going to go measure. So give that clarity on how to measure when we know what to measure. In terms of the trustworthiness and safety, our view is that they are interdependent, but not separate or distinct. For example, in executive order, we see that it refers to safety in the context of work health and contexts such as healthcare, financial services, education, housing, law, transportations, all those important verticals that we want to maximize the benefits of AI. But also, in addition, safety is referred to national security, and this framing of safety is also correct. The Section 4 of the EO, which is really focusing on the safety and security, also has multiple references to trustworthy AI systems in the context involving national security and beyond. In addition to civil rights and equity in society, so again, safety is being trustworthiness is being framed in both national security, but also equity and civil rights. This framing of trust is also correct, and it all goes back to these two concepts being interdependent. So in short, while lengthy and detailed, the EO reveals the interdependency between the safety and trust across the different sections and across different verticals and applications. For example, a system that's inherently trustworthy by virtue of its design and development can be made unsafe by a permissive policy governing its use. We had talked about this and importance of the safety, security, trustworthy across the AI life cycles in AI RMF a lot. Another example that comes to mind is the discussions of the fostering of distrust in technological systems as an attack vector for nation states actors intent on creating societal discord. So that goes to disinformation campaigns and other risks aligned with synthetic contents and deepfakes. Again, at this point, we're thinking at trustworthiness and safety, or sometimes trust and safety as is being used. They are being used to talk about this interdependency. And the same thing also holds for trustworthiness, safety, and security. So we are, again, I think around the globe, we are all share the same goal of scientific underpinning for making sure that AI systems are being designed, developed, and used in a trustworthy, responsible, safe manners. And then it's great that a lot of the conversations are happening globally on unpacking these concepts and giving them sort of distinct definitions. But at this point, they're all interdependent. Your next question about significant happenings in the last 12 months. If it was 15 months, I would have included AI-RMF, but it's not. So to include AI-RMF, I talk about the establishment or launch of the AI Research Center that we like it to be a convening space for exchange of the information. So it hosts AI-RMF, crosswalks to AI-RMF, playbook for AI-RMF, and a lot of other additional documents that can help with understanding, mapping, measuring, managing of AI systems risks. I want to echo and second all of the important events that Daisy mentioned, from UN to safety summits, and kudos to UK for both the Standards Hub and the Safety Summit that was held last October. Talking about last October, we believe that executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy AI has been a very significant development in the world of the AI governance and trustworthy, safe AI. Also, the voluntary commitment that the White House worked with the developers of the frontier models and industry. 15 different companies have signed the voluntary commitments, and we saw the activities in G7 that also reflect similar intent and similar event text. We think that that's also very important and significant activities. I also want to give a shout out to OECD and many different work streams, from incident database to many other activities on, compute index. A lot of really good work is happening on OECD, but also OECD helping with other global conversations through G7 and also GPay. So just to summarize, is that it's a sort of exciting time in the AI space, not because a lot of things is happening and happening fast. It's also because there's a lot of good opportunities and interest from all different players and actors to commit to a future where AI systems are safe, secure, and helping by improving the quality of life, while their negative consequences, their risks are understood and managed. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Elham. And now over to you, Sebastian, to sort of complete the picture by adding your perspective on another really important jurisdiction, which is the EU, of course, with the EU AI Act and the standardization work there that you're deeply involved in. And it would be interesting to hear a bit more about the OECD's work as well that Elham already alluded to.
Yes, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this panel. I'll start commenting by taking a standardization perspective. And if you ask experts in standardization, regardless whether it's European or international level, about safety, they will say, yeah, safety is old. We've been talking and creating standards for safety for decades. And there are very, very well established frameworks An example is the IEC Guide 51 that kind of covers how functional safety aspects are taken into account across IEC work. Another one is the IEC 61508, again, a very, very mature standard on safety. And what we've seen over the past year is a stronger recognition that this established body and understanding of safety needs to be mapped to AI somehow. And that means, first of all, that safety doesn't become irrelevant just because a product now contains AI. It still has to satisfy similar safety rules or the same safety rules as before when it didn't contain AI. And sometimes that forces us to have a long, hard look at the safety metrics that we're using, and also at the way in which we prove safety, and also the way in which we make compromises, or when do we say, well, this is sufficient proof of safety, which in the AI case is often different or also more difficult than in the non-AI case. The second point that I'd like to highlight, and Elham and Daisy alluded to it already, this is really safety from the perspective of not so much existential risks, but unintended side effects. My strong view is that there is no evolutionary path from today's AI to artificial general intelligence that would pose completely fundamentally different safety risks. But there is an evolutionary path from today's AI to AI systems that are used in safety critical contexts and are used in contexts where they can have all sorts of unintended side effects, for example, on critical infrastructure or indeed on fundamental rights. And therefore, I'm very, very glad that AI safety has become, if you like, a first-class citizen in the global discussion over the past year. Now, looking a little bit at the institutional setup, the AI Act has obviously already been mentioned, and the conclusion of the political process has now provided a stable framework, a stable basis to create the harmonized standards for the AI Act that will provide a recognized path towards compliance in Europe. That work already started back in 2021 in very close collaboration, both with industry and with the European Commission. It has a formal mandate from the Commission, and we aim to have the first draft versions of all the relevant standards ready by the end of this year, followed by 2 rounds of consultations and voting to finalize them well before the 2-year implementation period when the bulk of the AI Act comes into force. Elham has already mentioned the OECD that has taken an increasingly strong role, not only for AI governance, but also AI safety. I would like to add to the committees and activities that Elham mentioned by pointing out, first of all, the AI Futures expert group that tries to get an understanding, kind of a well-founded, hype-free understanding of longer range risks, including existential risks, beyond the current hype or buzzword that emerges around the public statements of well-known figures in the industry. Secondly, I'd like to highlight the ongoing work of the expert group on AI risk and accountability. This is creating an extra chapter for an existing binding and actually very much active and vibrant OECD framework. And that's the multinational guidelines for responsible business conduct. They have teeth, and today they refer to things like child labor, environmental protection, not bribing local officials, and it will get an extra chapter that we are preparing on AI governance. And finally, I'd like to pick up on Alan's point on disinformation and societal discord, there is also an OECD activity that was initiated last year, a global challenge on digital trust. And this is very much to explore the solution space that we're looking at. Because the traditional approaches that we use for disinformation, things like promoting media literacy, having detection tools, watermarking, fact-checking, they are of very, very limited power when we're faced with AI automated, really, really good fakes that are both a quality problem because they're impossible to detect, at least impossible beyond an arms race, and that are also very difficult to handle in terms of quantity and are overwhelming traditional mechanisms. The Global Challenge on Digital Trust put out a call for partners last year, and we expect the actual challenge to launch later this year. And with that, back to you, Flora. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I will just insert a brief comment in my role as a chair to say that we will try to work in some questions later on. So for those of you in the audience, feel free to start thinking about any questions you may have. We'll have some microphones to go around. And there have been some questions coming in via Slido as well, which I'll keep an eye on. There are a couple of questions on Slido actually around, what are the most prominent risks or urgent risks to address on AI safety. And I think you've indirectly addressed some of those questions already, and there seems to be a lot of shared ground between the three of you in terms of risks around misinformation, especially in the election context this year, and then more broadly sort of risks associated with misuse. So I think we've addressed some of that. One thing I'd like to come back to maybe in a round of quick answers is the role, dig a bit deeper into the role of standards, and specifically thinking about the standards needs in the context of AI safety. Sebastian, you already mentioned, one of the strategic questions that exist in this context in terms of existing safety standards, adapting them to AI, or thinking about, what's the gap between existing safety standards and what's needed for AI. I think there's some other strategic questions around, if you think about frontier AI, the Safety Summit focus, what are the specific standards needs in relation to frontier AI? How does that relate to broader AI standards? And then who is going to develop the relevant standards? So we know that the AI safety institutes will be looking at standards. SDOs like ISO, IEC, CEN-CENELEC are important forum for developing standards for AI. How do you see the relationship between those different fora for developing standards evolve? Maybe we'll do a quick round in the same order, starting with you, Daisy.
Sure. So first of all, to say I think people use the term standards to mean quite a few different things. Just in this context, so I'm going to talk about it in two different ways, picking up on your question, Florian. So first is digital technical standards, and this is essentially what the AI Standards Hub is playing a role in coordinating and investing kind of significant sums in the AI Standards Hub this year to kind of support the development of global digital standards in a kind of multi-stakeholder setting. That is slightly different from what's happening in the AI Safety Institute at the moment, which is basically developing how we should do safety testing. And to avoid confusion at the moment, we're calling that protocols, but that's not formal, that's just internally. I think there is a conversation about, I think it's early days in both of these spaces really, and there is definitely a conversation about how these two sort of areas of standards come together. But we're not there yet. And I think Sebastian knows a lot more about this than me, so I'm going to slightly defer to him to tell us the answer to that.
Great, thank you. Elham, over to you.
I agree that standards are being used for different meaning, and in the EOS at NIST, we often say standards with capital S or small s because while standard is our middle name, we are not standard development organization such as international standard organizations, ISO or IEC or IEEE. And that goes with go back to what Daisy said about how a set of guidelines, protocols can also be considered at ISO. But for the sake of this conversations, I'm going to refer to standards as specifications or documentary consensus-based specifications that coming out of standard development organizations, that there is a due process and a process in developing those standards. I think Sebastian talked about, rounds of comments and adjudications. But in terms of the standards, I think the discussions we had on the definition of safety is a really good indicators of the type of standards what we need. We need to have clear specifications that can be defined in standards, and then conformity or compliance to those specifications that can be benchmarks, assessments, certifications for trustworthy AI, for safe AI, starting by defining common vocabularies and terms. Again, that's give a shared understanding on what we want to measure. And then beyond that, we need to also establish the socio-technical characteristics of the systems that we want to measure and have a good definitions for them. Having those two, then we can move on developing metrics and methodologies, test beds and test environments, and ways to validate, verify, test and evaluate AI systems. And by doing all of these things, standards can set the right safeguards for both innovations and use of the technology. So it can provide safe space for the innovation to happen. And these all are important because in a way, standards will shape the design, development, and use of the technologies that underpin our economies, culture, society. So just to wrapping it up, again, we need standards that can articulate requirements, specifications, test methodologies, guidelines for what we mean by safety, trust, and trustworthiness. And then the test beds and test environments and test reporting that can allow us to sort of have assurances of the functionality, interoperability, and trustworthiness or safety of the systems. I'll pause here, but just before I do that, I also want to say that there is a lot of activities on advancing standards are going on in standard development organizations such as ISO, Sentinelec, a lot others. But one thing that we need to also build and strengthen is the scientific underpinning for development of the standards. So good standards are those that are clear, implementable, technically correct, and coherent. And with the fast pace of this technology, as it was said, we are just trying to figure out what safety means or come up with a better definitions and clear definitions so we can measure them. So it's really important to not lose the sight of the research that needs to be done to make sure that the standards are science-backed and empirically validated to actually achieve the goal of standards. Otherwise, if it's open to multiple interpretations, then the main goal of standard, which is achieve interoperability, is not going to be achieved because it's open to different interpretations. And that's what we're trying to do as part of the EOS AI Safety Institute, to build that science, to advance that science, so we have scientific underpinning for standards, get the results of those research, get them into technical building blocks for development of the clear implementable standards. And do that, I think it has been mentioned several times, iteratively with the community as the technology moves and as our knowledge about things that we want to measure improves.
For emphasizing the role of research in the context of standards as well is, of course, very topical to today's event and the wider context of AI UK. Sebastian, over to you. You've got the final word to complete the picture on standardization.
I'd like to highlight one of the major challenges with frontier AI or with foundation models. We've seen already policymakers struggle to build frontier AI into the AI Act. And this is not only because it had to happen at the 11th hour and hot on the heels of technical progress, it's also because the AI Act is product safety legislation. So the structure, the architecture of the AI Act is derived from earlier product safety legislation. However, foundation models are not products in the classical sense. They are much more like raw materials that can turn into something safe, or they can turn into something very, very unsafe. And therefore, the regulatory regimes and also the standardization regimes around foundation models in the longer term need to be inspired by the way in which we handle dangerous raw materials, maybe with regard to chemical safety or biological safety. And this wasn't possible in Europe due to the constraints of the policymaking progress, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we need to draw on these traditions for a better longer-term handling of foundation models. I would also like to point out a danger in the discussion over the past year. There's been an assumption, or let's say it's easy to assume, that all the downsides and potential risks of AI, including AI safety, can be addressed by optimum AI regulation and standardization. So the assumption is, well, if only we manage to create the optimum AI policies, regulatory regimes, standardization frameworks, then we can achieve AI safety. And that's simply not true. The biggest reason why this is not true is that we have powerful AI in the hands of bad actors already. And we've also got bad actors that have got the capability themselves to further develop and evolve very, very powerful, but also very dangerous AI. And this is particularly true for frontier AI. And of course, we will not reach bad actors through regulation, and we will not reach bad actors through standardization. So instead, we have to think much more fundamentally about how do we build resilience. How do we, for example, make the digital space resilient against large-scale efforts on disinformation? And resilience in a way that is not obsolete half a year down the line when AI research has progressed even further and the fabrication tools have become better. So that discussion on resilience of the digital space and other measures to address AI risks, but that have got nothing to do with AI in itself, that discussion is something that I'd like to see in a much stronger shape over the coming year. Thank you.
Florian, if I can jump in and underscore and double click on what Sebastian said, that Sebastian, you said that regulations and standards are not going to be the complete answer or solutions to AI misuse and abuse. I want to add to the list of regulation and standard evaluations. So no evaluation by itself can uncover every risks, every misuse. So it's really important to have the right expectations about what we go in and do. And I think that will have really important implications on the certifications. And another thing that I like to underscore and double click is you said that build resilience in digital space. I often say this about, again, technology, that's AI is also part of that we want technology that's easy to do the right thing, difficult to do the wrong thing, and easy to recover if somebody unintentionally did the wrong thing. That means to build those, you said resilience, but also other safety, security, trustworthiness characteristics into the technology by design. rather than trying to put to kind of through the standards, regulations, or evaluations uncover the problems. And I think that's when I said that this is exciting time is because of the recognition of all these factors and getting the technology developers to think about should we versus can we, and try to answer all of these questions at the earliest stage as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Elham. Unfortunately, I'm very sad to say we've run out of time. In fact, we're already over time, and time has flown by. Apologies, we didn't in the end get to include any questions from the audience. My sincere apologies for that. If you're interested in the topic, let me say as a concluding point, we remind you we've got the stand for the AI Standards Hub. If you're interested in the topic or any of the broader questions we've touched on during the session and you would like to have a chat, please drop by. Our team will be there and we'd be delighted to hear your thoughts on the topic and also think about, from your perspective, what is needed to make progress in this space. Thank you very much to our speakers, Daisy, Elham, Sebastian, for joining us this afternoon. And I am glad, thank you, Sebastian, for raising this point at the end on the limitations of standards and regulation. I think that's a point that's easy to miss in, for those of us who are focused on regulation in our work, right? Sort of to think about the kinds of behavior and actors that aren't captured by regulatory efforts or standards efforts. So maybe we'll have a more focused session on that topic next year. But for now, thank you very much to our speakers. Thank you to you in the audience for joining us, and enjoy the rest of the day.